Welcome to Hard Talk with me, Stephen Sacker. My guest today is one of the few politicians in Europe who can, with some justification, say that he saw the Eurozone financial crisis coming. That's because Nigel Farage has built his entire political career upon the conviction that Europe's economic and political integration is fundamentally flawed for the continent's citizens as a whole, but for Britain in particular. His outspoken attacks on the Euro elite from his position as a member of the European Parliament have won him Eurosceptic fans across the continent. But it's within Britain that his political strategy really matters. The party he heads, the UK Independence Party, is currently supported by 10% of the British public, according to the latest polls, enough to seriously threaten the Conservative Party's chances of winning a majority at the next election. For UKIP, the European Union's current existential crisis represents an historic opportunity. But is the party playing with fire? Nigel Farage, welcome to Hard Talk.
Thank you.
Do you see this, what is happening in Europe right now, as your I told you so moment?
Well, I'm not happy with what's happening, though I did predict it. I'm not happy because tens of millions of people are being made to suffer because a political dream is being continued despite all the facts saying that the answer is to end it. So it's up to others to make up their minds. But, I mean, frankly, it wasn't just me. There were lots of economists who, at the birth of the euro, said this would not work. And what we now face, I think, is a very, very serious situation.
Well, nobody would dispute it's very serious,
yeah.
but even in the tenor of what you're telling me right now, you are suggesting that it's a one-way ticket to financial Armageddon, and clearly we do not know that. In fact, there are many powerful voices, not least powerful leaders in Europe, who are insistent that meltdown and breakup of the euro can be and will be avoided.
Well, how can it be avoided? I mean, it is actually impossible. I mean, look, you've got those southern countries, those Mediterranean countries, trapped inside the economic prison of the euro. Youth unemployment rates now in the high 50% in some of those countries. 1 in 4 private companies having gone bust since 2008. And a package of measures being given to those countries that is driving the economy into a downward deflationary death spiral. There is no way this thing can survive. There is no way.
Well, you don't know that.
There is no way
you don't know that,
survive.
and not only do you not know it, there are powerful forces across the world economy who are desperate to ensure that this crisis does pass in Europe. I'm thinking of the IMF. I'm thinking even of national governments like the Chinese government, who've made it plain that they are prepared to be a significant part of an effort to keep the eurozone alive.
They are. The Chinese actually are very reluctant, and they're not stupid, and they won't pour good money after bad. And I think the IMF, I mean, frankly, the role of the IMF in this has been an absolute disgrace, and I've been saying so loudly and clearly for months.
But the IMF, they are not idiots, and the IMF clearly feels a deep commitment to keeping the eurozone alive.
Well, the IMF is breaking its own charter. You know, the IMF has been around since the end of World War II. It has actually performed a very good job. Its charter is not to prop up failing political projects, and we've seen this week a prominent member of the IMF resign after 20 years, making many of these arguments. Look, what the IMF should be doing is going into a country like Greece, going into a country like Spain. Yes, of course they need austerity. Yes, of course they need cutbacks, but they also need the compensation of the IMF helping them to have a competitive devaluation. That is what the IMF has spent the last 65 years doing, and it's broken those rules.
Seems to me there's very little nuance to your message about the forthcoming Armageddon in Europe. It seems to me, and to many much more expert observers than me, it's quite possible there will be a Greek exit from the euro eventually. Perhaps some other so-called periphery nations might have to leave too. But the fundamental core, if you like, the essence of it, which more than anything else is about a Franco-German economic partnership at the heart of Europe, that is not going to collapse.
One thing that nobody has noticed over the last couple of years is the increasing competitiveness gap between France and Germany. The two countries, as you describe, right at the core of the Eurozone. And the election of President Hollande is going to make that situation worse. His first act as president was to reduce the retirement age from 62 to 60. His next act was to increase the minimum wage. And ultimately, the French and Germans, there will be a gap that is so great between them that the voices in France to leave the euro will, and it may take 5 years, but they will grow.
You do appear to be revelling in this, and I just think, is there not a case of being careful about what you wish for? Because the British economy is so fundamentally wrapped up with the Eurozone economy. What, 50% and more of our trade is with the Eurozone, that we are dreadfully exposed to the sort of nightmare scenario you're painting.
Look, I am not talking about Armageddon. I'm talking about liberation. Actually, when Greece and Spain leave the euro, far from them going back to the dark ages, they'll be in a position where their economies can start to recover. We saw that, of course, with Iceland.
But this would take decades before they would get even close to where they were 2-3 years ago.
What will? Listen, if they're kept trapped where they are, they're headed for total disaster, and that's bad for our business too. The sooner the Eurozone is broken up, the better. And you talk about British business. Of course we're affected by a downturn in the Eurozone, but please can we remember there's a global economy out there as well.
Yes, but let's be realistic about where we are today. I don't know if you've read it, but the consultants Maplecroft, they've looked at the Eurozone exposure of nations across the world. They put us at number 1, the most vulnerable, the most exposed nation. They say that if there was a strategic collapse of Euro countries such as Spain and Italy, it would be a 7% drop in UK trade, resulting in losses of around £95 billion in the UK banking sector alone. Is this something that you're cheerfully looking forward to?
Well, you've got a choice, haven't you? You know, when you have made loans to people who are struggling to repay you, you face a choice. Do you call it double or quits and lend them a whole load more money, hoping that in the end things will improve? Or do you at some point actually face up to the fact that you've made a terrible mistake? I do not want the British taxpayer, whether it's directly or through the IMF, to put a penny piece more into Eurozone bailouts. We are pouring good money after bad.
Yes, but as you know, the British government, having put a very small sum, relatively small sum, into the EU bailouts, isn't putting money into the forthcoming...
It's doing it through the back door of the IMF.
Well, it's got obligations, the IMF, as all developed nations have.
Well, actually, the Canadian government have made it perfectly clear that they will not put any more money into IMF bailing out Eurozone countries.
Isn't perhaps the bigger flaw in your argument that you seem to be positing the fundamental mess that we see in a whole bunch of European nation states right now as the product of the European Union? The truth is, it's the product of failed economic models and policy making in individual nations, from Greece to Ireland to Spain.
But you've just made the argument for floating currencies. It's because you have different governments pursuing different policies. It's because you have different countries operating at different stages of the economic cycle that you need exchange rates that go up and go down to adapt to where you are relative to your neighbours. The stupidity, the absolute stupidity of the euro was to make an assumption back in 1999 that all these economies had converged. And you know,
you can interpret it as a message about floating exchange rates. I was rather interpreting it as a comment on your earlier point that we in the UK have become so dependent on Europe we haven't exploited the trading opportunities we could have elsewhere in the world.
Well, that's very much the case.
Well, but surely that doesn't make any sense if you look at Germany, for example, the world's greatest exporting nation, locked into the Eurozone, at the heart of the European project. Germany is the most successful exporter in the world.
Yes, to Europe.
Well, not just to Europe, around the world. Where do you think all these German cars go? They go to China.
It's very, very interesting that Germany as an economy is very much more dependent on the European time zone than Britain. We've always been more of a global trading nation than Germany. And again, another one of the idiocies.
Are you not aware of how many German cars are sold into the Chinese market?
Yes, but as a percentage, Germany does more business with the rest of Europe than we do. It always has done. And interestingly, over the last couple of years, most growth in the German economy has come from Eurozone exports. But, you know, we're different economies. One of Britain's biggest problems is that despite the fact we have huge advantages of language, of culture, of tradition, of common law, we're not allowed to have trade deals with the rest of the English-speaking world.
I suppose my simple point is this, and you have to address it because the British people will want you to address it as the political argument about the future of Europe unfolds. How come Germany can be so successful, locked inside what you regard as this extremely damaging European project, when our economy is much less successful and we're not locked into anything like the same extent?
Well, she's a manufacturing country. You know, she manufactures goods, whereas the bigger part of our business is the sale of services. They're different economies.
Let's think about this. Just the other day, José Manuel Barroso was asked about the UK and the apparent rise in Euroscepticism and the polls suggesting that more and more people are considering the option of pulling out of the European Union. And he said this, he said, "It doesn't make any sense to me." He said, "When the Prime Minister of Britain meets the US or Chinese president, he has much stronger status and leverage because those leaders in Beijing or Washington know that Britain is a country that is influential inside in shaping European policy."
Wow, how exciting. Isn't it marvellous? You know, we've got an 8% say in what Mr Barroso and Mr Van Rompuy go and say at the G8.
You think we are simply 8% in terms of our leverage inside the European Union? Would we not acknowledge that?
We have no influence there at all.
Britain, Germany and France, they are regarded as the leading nations in the European Union, and of course they have influence.
We are disliked. We are, frankly, openly despised by Barroso and almost everybody else.
You maybe.
No. Britain is. The UK is.
Well, I suspect you're more despised than Britain as a whole because you are so loud, so vociferous.
Well, I've pointed out the fact that Europe's been hijacked by a gang of unelected bureaucrats, of whom Mr Barroso is at the very top. I've also pointed out that every single prediction that Barroso has made about the Eurozone has been wrong over the course of the last 5 or 6 years. So why should we listen to him?
Yes, but his point, I suppose, putting it at its bluntest, was that why do Britons think that pulling out of the European Union would leave them with, frankly, much more significance in the world than a Norway or an Iceland?
Well, let's think about trade, shall we, for argument's sake. When the World Trade Organization meets to discuss global trade, Britain has to leave the room. Not allowed to be in there. The fact we're the 5th largest trading nation in the world, we have to leave the room to have an unelected bureaucrat from Brussels represent us and make our trade policy. We would have much more say on the world stage as an independent nation.
Yes. Let's just talk about the political knock-on of all of the economic travails of Europe. You said the other day, a big danger we face is that Euroscepticism across the continent will now move sharply to the left and to the right. So you will have Eurosceptic parties that are also Islamophobic or anti-Semitic or totally anti-free market. That is the rise of dangerous extremism.
Yes, I think that's right. And I think that when you take away from people their ability through the ballot box to change everything, they move towards two things. One is violence on the streets, and the other is the extremes politically of right and left, and we're beginning to see that.
So why are you allied with some of these representatives of the extremes of, in particular, the right inside the European Parliament?
I've always avoided that, and that's why we have different groups in the European Parliament, and equally we have a non-attached group, and all of us, have to make value judgments.
You make it sound pretty straightforward, but it's not very straightforward at all. The Europe of Freedom and Democracy bloc, of which you are the biggest single element, includes the Northern League. A senior politician, parliamentarian from the Northern League, said just the other day of gays, he said, "It's unfortunate they exist. They are sick. They are different, crazy. I see their obscene behaviour in public, on the streets and in parks. We give them all this freedom. I don't see it as a positive thing." He's a political fellow traveller of yours.
I don't know who that is, but I will say this to you. Italian politics, all Italian politics, is extreme in its language and behaviour compared with ours. I mean, after all, Berlusconi was their Prime Minister for nearly 14 years. So,
are you now saying you wish you weren't in an alliance with the Northern League, of whom Santino Bozza is an elected MP?
Well, he's an MP. I don't know the man. I've never met the man. We are not. We are not.
You know that he's in the Northern League, and I'm asking you now whether, when you hear things like this, whether you worry that for all of the talk you give me about your concerns for the rise of extremism in Europe, whether you actually are part of that.
No. The Northern League are, by British standards, a very eccentric political party, but then Italian politics is...
Well, all right, let's move to Finland then. You've commented about your real friendship with the leader of the True Finns party. He's got problems because his own MPs have been fined for making comments linking Islam to paedophilia, another fined for claiming that Muslim immigrants brought violence to Finland. This is a party that you say you've got excellent relations with.
I think that Timo Soini is a magnificent politician. I'm a full supporter of everything that man's done in Finland. The fact he's got some people inside his party that make comments we don't like, I can't be responsible for.
I'm sorry, you can't just get away with a cheeky grin saying, oh, I'm not responsible. I mean, these are people who are your political colleagues and allies.
My political colleague is Timo Soini. He's the person I work with. The fact that he went from 5 MPs to 40 MPs and one or two make odd comments, don't be surprised, Bart.
All right, well, let's bring it to Britain. Let's look at at your current performance in opinion polls, which is positive. You know, you, after the last election, commanded all of, what, 3% of the general vote, but now you're at around 10% in most of the opinion polls, clearly much better. But the problem for you is that you've had these surges before, even bigger surges than this one, and they have always fallen away.
We've never had a surge like this. No, we've got to differentiate between Euro elections and general elections. We've had surges in Euro elections. It happened in 2004, aided and abetted in those days by Mr. Gilroy Silk. We had the same thing happen in 2009. What has never happened before is we've never had a surge when people are asked the question, how would you vote if there were a general election tomorrow? So this is very different.
Doesn't seem to have made much difference to your policy making. I mean, I'm struggling, but on economics, are you still committed to the flat tax? Are you still committed to abolishing inheritance tax, reinstating tax refund, a whole raft of policies which it seems clear would benefit the rich and actually be redistributive in the sense of giving more to the rich and taking from the less well-off? Is that really a viable policy in the current economic climate?
I mean, you know, these are old arguments. I mean, for example, the inheritance tax argument, the fact is the very rich don't pay it anyway. They've never paid it. You know, there are all sorts of offshore trusts and means of...
So no change. As far as you're concerned, the economic crisis Britain is in, no change to your policies whatsoever.
We want to bring the poorest people out of tax in Britain. We've argued for that for many, many years. One of the few good things the coalition has done is it's begun to up the thresholds, but nowhere near far.
Right, and on immigration, an absolute freeze on immigration for five years. Permanent settlement, frozen for 5 years.
Until we sort the mess out, yes. We've no idea, with the nearest 2 million, how many people are actually living in this country.
So however grave the humanitarian need of family reunification or anything else, no factor is conceivable which would let you
somebody could be
drop
granted
this absolute
somebody
freeze.
Could be granted refugee status. I mean, that is a very different thing. Somebody could live here as a refugee, but we're not going to give people, you know, the full rights. We can't have a social security system that is open to the whole of Eastern Europe. That's really what we're saying. And, you know, last year, only 14,000 refugees came to Britain out of a total of 600,000. So we're talking about this really
right. So, and what's your message to businesses? Businesses who've squealed long and loud in previous debates about the possibility of putting punitive quotas on the number of people allowed to come into Britain to work. What's your message to them?
Work permits. Proper work permits. One of the big mistakes we've made over the last 15 years. We've confused work and settlement. They become one and the same thing. It needs to be separated out again.
Just a final policy issue that I'm a little confused about. You say that you would return power to the people in the UK by introducing referenda for all sorts of issues at local and national political level, so that laws, you say, are made by the people's will, not by the fads of the political class. I'm just wondering how, when so many key policies, whether it be on the NHS or welfare or energy or defence, require a strategic overview of 15 to 20 years at least, how you can conduct coherent policy based on referenda.
The point about the referendums is that, you know, we wouldn't be holding a referendum every Sunday. A government is able to have a 10 or 15-year course, but if a significant number of people are unhappy with that direction, they can call a referendum on the issue. And this happens.
So what does that do to, for example, the investment climate in the energy sector?
Listen, if we talk about the energy sector and look at the total horlicks British governments have made of it...
So you just want to make it worse? Even more confusing?
Well, I tell you what, if enough people called a referendum to stop us building wind farms, we'd be an awful lot better off.
All right, so these are the planks of the platform, and this is what you're trying, it seems to me, more than anything else, to seduce Eurosceptic Tory voters with. Do you think it's going to work?
Well, not just Eurosceptic Tory voters. I mean, we're looking for patriotic voters, people who believe we should govern ourselves, people who believe we should re-engage with the Commonwealth, people who believe democracy matters, people who believe that we should actually be protecting our precious rights of habeas corpus and all those sort of things. Now, that isn't just a Conservative thing. There are lots of old Labour people out there too.
No, I understand that, but I know that you have a focus, particularly at the moment. You see the possibility of a realignment of the right in British politics. I wonder what you mean by that. And are you seriously suggesting to me that there are some senior members of the Tory party, maybe even MPs, who are looking at your party and quite tempted by what they see?
Well, I think what Cameron has done is he's turned the Conservative Party into another brand of social democracy. I mean, virtually indistinguishable, frankly, from Labour or the Lib Dems on many, many of the biggest issues. Over the last year, We've seen people like Stuart Wheeler join UKIP, you know, their former biggest ever donor. We've seen people like Lord Hesketh, who was former Chief Whip in the House of Lords. He's joined UKIP. Out there...
Frankly, these are not the biggest names in the Conservative Party. I mean, you need...
Well, I don't know. The Tory Party's biggest ever donor is quite important, I'd have thought.
Well, the donation aspect is quite important, but what you need, surely, is to convince Tories that it makes sense for them to sign up with you when, if they do so, the most obvious net result, surely, is going to be to the benefit of the Labour Party.
But that's irrelevant now. It doesn't matter who governs Britain. We're not voting to change governments in general elections. We're voting for a change of management. I spent 20 years working in the city. It is now irrelevant whether Labour or Tory win the election, as all the regulations that govern the markets are set in Brussels.
Let me quote you the words of your die-hard Eurosceptic Tory MP, David Heathcote-Amery, who says it's...
No, he's not a proper Eurosceptic. He's never come out and said we should leave the EU.
Well, he says it's absolutely crackers to vote for UKIP because UKIP thwarts the one party, the Conservatives, who have a chance of pursuing a Eurosceptic agenda.
Well, have a chance. They're not doing it, are they? We have a Prime Minister who said he will never give us a referendum on EU membership. People like Heathcote-Amery, they tell you everything that's wrong about the EU. They're wholly negative about everything it stands for, and they offer no alternative whatsoever.
So can you tell me here and now that there are Tory MPs who feel like you do, that this issue, the European issue, is so important they're prepared to jump ship from the Tory party and join you?
Yes.
How many?
Yes. Well, I don't know yet. We've had one MEP this year come and join us, Roger Helmer, and there are probably 20, maybe more, backbench Tory MPs who agree with UKIP, not just on Europe, they agree with UKIP on green taxes, they agree with UKIP on the insanity of wind farms, they agree with UKIP that grammar schools would be a good idea. There's a whole list of areas on which they agree with us. Now, what we've seen around the country are councillors defecting, former Tory Association chairman defecting. This is happening at an increasing rate.
Can you give me the name of any Tory MP who is thinking...
No, of course I can't at this moment in time. That would be crazy.
Well,
but don't just
problem, isn't it?
But don't just take my word for it. Well, no. Don't take my word for it. Tim Montgomery, who edits the Conservative Home website, it was he that wrote, I've spoken to 2 MPs who are seriously considering jumping ship.
Now, I'm very interested, before we end, in the personal journey you've made. You never were a Tory, but you've always described yourself as an economic liberal. How would you feel if, as a result of the inroads that you claim UKIP is about to make in British politics, a Labour government is back in power at the next election?
I couldn't care less. We're not governed from Westminster, we're governed from Brussels.
You couldn't care less?
Doesn't make any difference.
Even though the Labour Party, across a raft of issues that we've discussed today, represents so much that you abhor.
Listen, I care about lots of things in this country, but one thing I really care about is business. British business, small, medium and large, and it no longer matters who sits in number 10. And that message, I think, is beginning, the penny is beginning to drop with the British people and British businesses. We are no longer a self-governing nation. That matters far more than which brand of social democracy gets into
And if
number
this
10.
is your window of opportunity over the next year or 2 or 3, and you don't succeed and you don't make it, will you finally walk away and say the British people don't want my message?
I think we've got every chance over the next 2 or 3 years of changing the course of British politics. That's my intention. I'm going to give it my best shot.
Nigel Farage, thanks for being on Hard Talk.